Hi, I'm Pam Fox, and we're streaming live on YouTube. Welcome back to my channel, and we are going through the book of Genesis. Today we're in chapter 20. So, just a little touch of a catch up here as we're going through right now the beginnings of the very beginnings of the Israelite nation, where we introduce this major Hall of Fame character in the Bible, Abraham, Father Abraham, who was visited by God and told that through him that would come one that would bless all families of the earth. And there's a lot more to that. We saw the covenant, and we saw the promise of land, and the promise of an heir through him and his wife Sarah, even though he was an old guy. And then many years went by, a couple of decades, nearly 3, and no heir, no child with him and Sarah. They're getting older and older and older. And last week we were in chapter 19, and this character Lot pops up again. This is Abraham's nephew. These angels go into Sodom and they say, "We've got to get you out. God has decided to destroy Sodom because of its grievous sin, but he can't destroy it until you're out." And we talked a lot about that. The Bible never mentions anything about Lot that indicates that he's a righteous man or a man of God, or a faithful man, like it does about Abraham. And yet God said, you know, I'm destroying this town, but you have to get out first. God rescued Lot. And later we found out that it mentioned twice 2 different things that kind of help us understand a little bit better why God rescued Lot. And number 1 was because of Abraham, and number 2 was because of God's mercy. So this is what we saw last week, and of course we saw what happened to Lot after he left with him and his daughters. We talked about that last week, so we won't get into that again. But Sodom and Gomorrah have been destroyed. And Sodom, if you go and you look at a map of the Mediterranean Sea, and just to the east of that, you see what we consider now, Israel and the Middle East. To the south, we have Africa and Egypt, and to the north, we have modern-day Turkey and, Europe. This was considered the modern-day world at the time of the writings of these scriptures. And Sodom was just a town there to the east of the Mediterranean Sea, and to the east of the Dead Sea, actually. And we could do a whole study on Sodom and Gomorrah and what science has told us, modern day science has told us about the area, and everything that all of the different pieces of evidence that can be kind of put together to help us understand this area a little bit more, and how it supports these biblical documents recording this destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But we don't have time to get into that today. Today we're going to move right along through the book of Genesis. We're in chapter 20, continuing with the life of Abraham. And today is just another account of one of the things that happened in Abraham's life. Some more trouble that he gets himself into out of his humanness, I guess you could say. You could call it his disobedience to God, but really I would just call it his humanness. Like you and I, we're human, and we do dumb things. We make poor choices. We sometimes even go against what we believe for whatever reason. And this is an example of that today, where Abraham finds, this is a short little chapter, but Abraham is going to get himself into trouble once again. And we've seen this before. We're going to see him repeat a past poor choice today in chapter 20. All right, so let's get into it. Verse 1. And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country, and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned into Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. So this is what I was talking about. So remember, just a few chapters back, there was a famine, and Abraham took his wife Sarah into Egypt, and he said, "Tell him you're my sister," because she was beautiful, and he knew there was a risk that he could be killed and she could be taken by anyone. And that's what ended up happening. She was taken by the king of Egypt as part of his royal harem. But she said Abraham's my brother, and so they didn't kill him, and instead they lavished him with wealth. She must have been a really beautiful woman, is what I'm thinking, because she was already old at that point, and now today in this chapter, she's about 90 years old. So she must have been looking pretty good, or maybe the king, when he would recruit women into his royal harem, maybe they had different purposes. I don't know. I do wonder though. So anyway, it says here that they went south, and this king of Gerar, King Abimelech, saw Sarah, and she said, he's my brother, in order to spare Abraham. That was kind of the thinking and the mentality. So again, verse 2, and Abraham said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister, and Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Verse 3, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said to him, behold, thou art but a dead man. For the woman which thou hast taken, she is a man's wife. So God says to Abimelech in a dream, behold, you're a dead man. We have that saying today, like, oh, you're a dead man, or dead man walking. It's this idea that you've done something really, really bad. You're a dead man. And that's what God says to Abimelech in this dream. He says, behold, thou art a dead man. She's somebody's wife. Okay, verse 4. But Abimelech had not come near her. Abimelech had not come near Sarah. So Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou slay a righteous nation? So we have to remember that Sodom and Gomorrah in just the previous chapters had been decimated, incinerated, obliterated. This is something that would have gotten around. This was a major city, a major area with a massive reputation. And now it's been incinerated. And there would have been, surrounding cities that would have seen this fireballs coming out of heaven and just pulverizing the area and just annihilating everything there, and just the smoldering flames and smoke in the days after. In other words, this would have gotten around. People knew, and there would have been testimony, right, of neighboring towns. Like if you live up on a hill and you're looking down over a valley and you saw fireballs coming out of the sky and just annihilating the entire valley, you would have witnessed that and you would have talked about it. So people would have known what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. And now King Abimelech is saying, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? He's defending his country and saying, we're a righteous nation. Yeah, I took this woman who's not my wife, or that's somebody else's wife, but we are a righteous nation. Will you slay a righteous nation? And he goes on in verse 5, said he not unto me, she is my sister? So Abraham told Abimelech, she's my sister. So he's saying to God in this dream, he told me she was my sister, or she was his sister. And she herself said, he is my brother, in the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands. So again, Abimelech in his dream, he's defending himself. He's trying to convince God that I'm an innocent man. She said, he's my brother. He said, she's my sister. I've done nothing wrong. And of course, you and I can look at this and say, of course you've done plenty wrong. You're recruiting women to be a part of your royal harem. We can find something wrong with that. But in the day, that was a common thing. And he's saying to God, of this thing, I'm innocent. He says he has integrity and innocence in his heart. Verse 6, and God said unto him in the same dream, yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart. God says, I know. For I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. So God is saying the reason you didn't touch her is because I restrained you from doing so, which really tells us of the importance of Sarah in this particular chapter. That God, he held back. He held things back because he had a will for Sarah. He had a purpose for Sarah. She was to be the mother of the Israelite nation. And she was to be the mother of Isaac, and she was to be the mother of an only child, Isaac. And the reason I say this, like, the son that's not born yet, that she's going to have, God is going to open up her womb and she is going to get pregnant with her husband Abraham. But God protects her here with this, in this um, harem, this kingdom harem, from getting pregnant. When he opens up her womb, he protects her. Just really quick, let's look at this because I think it's really cool. And this is a short chapter, so we have time to take a little bit of a sidetrack here and look at Isaac, which we're going to talk a lot more about in the future once Isaac is born. But let's just do a little bit of foreshadowing about this child, Isaac, that's going to be born unto Abraham, the one that we've been talking about for the last several weeks. God keeps coming back to Isaac and saying, about this child, about this son, you're going to name him Isaac, and through him is going to be, my covenant will be with him and with his children, and all of these different. So who is Isaac? We're just going to look quickly at a few of the connections between Isaac and Jesus. So a lot of times, if you've been following me, and or maybe you already know this, but in the Christian faith, we oftentimes talk about typology or types in the Bible, which is when a person or a thing is either pointing to Jesus, and then there's this repetition more than once. And an example is here with Isaac. So Isaac was a type of Jesus, and I just brought up a few examples of that. Why he's a type of Jesus and what that means to help you better understand what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about when I talk about typology. Comes this Isaac. Number one, Isaac and Jesus were considered only begotten sons. So we see that in John 3:16, where Jesus is the only begotten son of God. Well, Isaac, while technically he had a brother Ishmael through Hagar, Isaac was the only begotten son. He was the promised son that God was going to work through of Ishmael and Sarah. So they were both only begotten sons. Isaac and Jesus were both named by God. Remember, we saw the first naming of a baby before it was born. It was actually Ishmael. God said, you shall name him Ishmael. And then again, we see with Isaac, you're going to have a son and you shall name him Isaac. We see this 7 times in the Bible, but we see it also with Jesus. So we see it with Isaac, we see it with Jesus, where God names them in the womb. So again, I'm just pointing out some of these similarities of this foreshadowing man, Isaac, of Jesus Christ. And that's an interesting study too, the 7 babies by God before they were born, but we won't get into that. They were both offered, so Jesus and Isaac were both offered up to God. They were an offering. We know, and we're going to see when we get into future chapters, we're going to see that Isaac wasn't actually offered up. He was taken up to be offered up, but God stopped Abraham and says, don't do it. Interestingly, Isaac and Jesus were both accompanied by 2 men on their way to be sacrificed. So we see this when Abraham is taking Isaac up the mountain to sacrifice him. It says in the scriptures that he took 2 men with him. Now, the story is that Abraham takes to the top of the hill and he builds an altar, and he's going to kill his son. He's going to sacrifice him like the sacrificial lamb. But it includes that. It includes that he took 2 of his men with him. Didn't need to include that, but he did. And then later we see with Jesus on the cross, he's there on the cross with 2 men, one on either side. So again, it was just all these little similarities that show that Isaac is a type or a foreshadow of Jesus. A couple more. Isaac and Jesus carried the wood for their sacrifices. So when we read the account of Isaac, and we will in the next coming weeks, we'll see that he had to carry his own wood up the hill for this sacrifice. He and his father went up. He knew they were going up there to make a sacrifice. He didn't know it was himself, and he carried the wood for that sacrifice. And then we see later Jesus carrying his own cross as he's heading up the hill to Golgotha to be crucified. We know that he couldn't carry his cross all the way up because his body was beaten and torn apart from the flogging. So they ordered someone else to carry the wood the rest of the way, but he did carry his cross for a portion of the way. We also see Isaac and Jesus were willing to experience their father's fire. So with Isaac, he's agreeable and he's very cooperative from the beginning till the end. We see in the account, we see Abraham coming this close to killing Isaac, and we don't have any mention of Isaac ever saying, "What's going on here?" or "Stop," or anything like that. He asks a couple of, I think he asks a question, "Where's the animal? We've brought the wood and we've got everything sacrificed. Where's the offering?" But we don't see him fighting his father. We see him being cooperative. Isaac and Jesus were sacrificial lambs, and Isaac and Jesus were in agreement with their father's will. In other words, when we see Jesus come, he constantly says, "I'm here to do what my father has sent me to do. I'm about my father's business." And we see the same with Isaac. All right, so let's get back to Genesis. I just want to do that little sidetrack because we are getting ready to enter into the story and the life of Isaac here in the coming weeks. So just keep that in mind, that Isaac is considered a type or a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ himself later on. So he's a very important character in God's plan. And here, Sarah is a very important character in God's big plan. And when she go near her. And we're going to find out later that Abraham and Isaac were probably there for at least 9 months, if not well over a year. And we'll find out why, and we'll talk about that in a minute, before they left. So verse 4, Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, okay, that's not where we're at. Verse 7. So in verse 6, God said, "Yeah, you didn't go near her, but it's because I restrained you from doing so." Verse 7 says, "Now therefore," so this is God talking, "now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet." Now, God mentions that Abraham's a prophet. This would have been important only because, you hear me a lot of times talk about the religious leaders of the Israelites during the days of Jesus, and how he was always rebuking these guys because they were so high and mighty and breaking all the rules, and how they were considered kind of celebrities of the day. They had thought of very high status. They were thought of as being very important. They were a big deal. Well, this is way before this so-called Levitical priesthood that we see later in the days of Jesus. There was no Levitical priesthood. There were no Levites. There were no Israelites. They haven't even been born yet. But they had prophets. And prophets, people knew about the prophets. They were considered kind of a type of celebrity. And so here God is telling Abimelech, Abraham is a prophet. So he's telling him to give back Sarah to Abraham. He's a prophet. He says, "And he shall pray for thee." Give back Sarah. Abraham's a prophet. Abraham's going to pray for you. He says, "And thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine." So God is giving King Abimelech a warning here. I don't think it's an ultimatum or a scare tactic. I think he's just letting him know the facts. He's just laying it all down. You need to return Sarah to her husband, the prophet. He's going to pray for your salvation so that you won't die. And if you don't return her, you're going to die, your family's going to die, your kingdom's going to die, your people in your country are going to die. They're all going to die. He's basically warning King Abimelech that what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah will happen to you. So this is a really big deal. This idea that Sarah is a very important part of God's plan here. She needs to be away from King Abimelech and with Abraham, so that she can get pregnant with this Isaac that's been prophesied. This is going to be the grandfather of all these nations. Verse 8. Therefore, Abimelech arose early in the morning. Remember, he saw all of this encounter with God in a dream in the night. He wakes up early in the morning, it says, and he goes right to work. It says he called all his servants and told all these things in their ears, and the men were sore afraid, which means all these servants that he called and told him everything that he saw in the dream were freaking out now because, again, they knew what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. And now they're like, we got to make this right or we're toast. Verse 9. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, what hast thou done unto us? And what have I offended thee? In other words, what have you done and what did I ever do to deserve this? What did I do to this? My husband had his 50th birthday party last night and I was up very late. I'm surprised I even have this much left. We'll get through this though. Drink. Okay, verse 9. So he says, what have you done? How, Abraham? What sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? So he's asking all of these questions, basically. Why have you done this? Verse 11. And Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. So that's his reason. That's the reason he gives. He says, I thought that if I came into your country with this wife, you'd kill me and take her. And remember, he's done this before. He did the same thing in Egypt with King Pharaoh. Same exact thing. And do you remember what happened? There were numerous plagues there in the land. They didn't give us any detail, but we have a lot of detail about plagues in the land of Egypt. In the story of Moses. It doesn't give us any detail here, but we can imagine what God was up to when he brought all these plagues upon Egypt because Sarah was in the Pharaoh's royal harem and not with Abraham where she belonged. So Abraham says, I did it because I thought there were no godly people here in this country. And so it was likely you would kill me and take Sarah. So we said she was my sister. Verse 12, and yet indeed she is my sister. So Abraham says, and yet indeed she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So here we find out, we didn't really know this until this point. There's a little bit of genealogy back in the beginning of Abraham that kind of hints to this, but now it becomes very clear. Sarah is his sister, which wasn't uncommon of the day. They had the same father but different mothers, so they were blood related, but they were considered, steps. And like I said, it wasn't uncommon to marry a step. Today it would be scandalous, of course. I'm sure it still happens, but it's considered scandalous. But in the day, it wasn't that uncommon. So he was using, she's my wife one minute, she's my sister the next. He was using that she's my sister when it was, protective for him or good for him, which of course we don't like. We don't like that. I'm sure God didn't like it either. And so here's a case where God intervenes to kind of get the wheels back in motion and get things back on track for the purpose that God has intended, for Abraham and Sarah to have an only son, Isaac. So yeah, in verse 12 he says, yeah, she's my sister. We have the same dad. We don't have the same mom. She became my wife. Verse 13, and it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house. Remember, we saw that in the very beginning of the account of Abraham. It said God visited Abraham and said, leave your father, leave your house, leave your country. You're going to go to a land I will show you. And he left. And he took Sarah with him, and he took his nephew Lot with him. So here he's saying, he's remembering this, and it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, this is thy kindness which thou shalt show unto me. At every place whither we shall come, say of me, he's my brother. So he's just kind of including his, he's defending himself and what he's done. And he's reminiscing and saying, God told us to leave my father's house and to go into this new land. And I told Sarah, do this kindness to me and tell people you're my sister. So he's basically, the author is letting us know that Abraham told Sarah to tell people, yeah, he's my brother. as a kindness to Abraham. Verse 14, let's see, yeah, verse 14. And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants and gave them unto Abraham and restored him to his wife. So we saw the same thing with the Pharaoh in Egypt, right? There was all these plagues, and the Pharaoh said, take your wife and get out of here and take all this wealth too. Just to kind of, I don't know, I imagine he did it just as a security. Like, here's your wife, and he kind of sweetened the pot. And we see the same thing here. God didn't tell Abimelech to give Abraham a bunch of wealth. He said to give Abraham Sarah. But he sweetens the pot. He says, sheep, oxen, men servants, women servants, and gave them unto Abraham and restored his wife. Verse 15. And Abimelech said, behold, my land is before thee, dwell where it pleaseth thee. In other words, also, here's your wife, here's some wealth. My home is your home. You can live wherever you want when you come into my country. He's trying to protect his country from being annihilated by God at this point. So he's doing everything he can. Verse 16, and unto Sarah he said, behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. So King Abimelech says, Sarah, I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. He's sticking to this brother narrative because he doesn't want to admit that she's his husband, because that's what they told him. So I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver, which would have been a ton of money back then, just like it is today. Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eyes, and to all that are with thee, and with all other. Thus she was reproved. So this is a fan of saying Sarah was, this word reproved, when we go into the Strongs, it means justified. So King Abimelech is saying, I've made all of this right. I've done everything I can, and we've made it all right. We're good. You're good. I'm good. We're good. Okay. So thus she was reproved. Verse 17. So Abraham prayed unto God. So remember, God told Abimelech in the dream, give Sarah back. Abraham, he's a prophet. He's going to pray for you, and that prayer is going to save your life. So it says, Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare. For the Lord had fast closed up all the wounds of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So here's where we can theorize. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that they must have been there for a period of time for the people there in Abimelech's household to realize no one is getting pregnant, having babies. So they would have had to be there for a certain amount of time, right? About a year maybe, to start to realize there are no pregnant women in our household and there are no babies being born. This has never happened before. Why are all these women barren? So that was the plague that came upon Abimelech and his entire household due to Sarah being in their presence where she wasn't supposed to be. But Abraham prayed for Abimelech, and it says Abimelech was healed. We don't know of what, but he was healed. His wife was healed. All the women in their household were healed, and their wombs were opened up, and they were once again able to bear children once Sarah was out of the household. So again, what I see in this chapter is an emphasis on this idea of the importance of Sarah and God using her in his bigger plan. And what's the bigger plan? Well, the bigger plan it's the whole Bible, right? It's the story from beginning to end. God puts something in motion. To you and I, it seems like it's taken forever, right? Because now we have already 6,000 years of history going back to these people that we're studying about. And it's like, why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long? All of these prophecies of this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and all of it, little by little, it happens. The prophecy of the Messiah coming, Jesus Christ, of course, we know that happened. And now we're waiting on all of these end time prophecies that have been being told in the prophets of the Old Testament. Matthew 24, the entire chapter, he talks about the end times. And of course, the book of Revelation and so many other places in the Bible, we have these prophecies telling us about how it's all going to end. And so I personally, I'm one to believe, and of course, I can't say that it's for certain, but I'm one to believe that we are in those end times. Is that to say we're in the tribulation? No, I don't think that at all. But the end times can include the things that take place leading into the tribulation, those those birth pangs, if you will, that Jesus refers to. And for anyone that's had a baby, you know that the pains they get more intense as they get closer together before you go into actual labor. And so I kind of feel like that's where we might be, although I could totally be wrong. All throughout history, there have been things that take place that are like birth pains, right? They're persecution and wars and things where that take place where a lot of people are hurt, a lot of people are injured, a lot of people die. So we don't know if we're in the end times for certain. I tend to think that we might be, and that everything that's taking place right now in the world is leading into, and this is why I tend to think that we are into those end times, is because all around the globe right now we have, and it's no secret, nobody's hiding it, and it's not a conspiracy, we have a push towards global currency, global government, global medical, global religion, global leadership. And all of that has been prophesized that in the end, that's how it's all going to kind of culminate. And so we're seeing a push for this. At least if you're paying attention, it's not a conspiracy, and it's not being hidden. I mean, you can pay attention to the World Economic Forum. You can pay attention to several things in current events right now it's right out there in the open, and that's what we're working towards, is this globalization. So but it doesn't mean that we are necessarily in the end times, because that globalization might be around for a while before it gets really, really bad, and then the end times kick in. So we don't know. But while we're here, the Bible tells us to occupy the space and redeem the time. And we are to go. Today I was reminded by a very close friend of mine, my dear friend Karen, that wonderful old Christmas carol, Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is one of my favorites, where the song says to go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. And we are to tell. And we're to share this amazing story of the salvation and the way that God made for you and I to be saved. And it's through Jesus. The song says to go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. And Jesus Christ himself said, go and make disciples of every nation. Why did he say that? Why is the gospel message so important? Because it's when we hear the gospel message and we make the choice to believe in the power and the majesty of Jesus Christ and how God is using him to save his people. If only we believe in Jesus Christ, we have faith. Just like Abraham, God said it was because of his faith that he credited righteousness unto him. And the same is for you and me. God accredits righteousness to you and to me through our faith, through our belief. And so if we hear the gospel message and we believe in Jesus Christ, we start to become a new person. We're changed. The Holy Spirit indwells us, and we now belong to God. And now nothing can separate us from the love of God and from God himself. I think the only thing that could separate us is me, myself, and I. Like if I decide I no longer want to be a part of God, I am going to stand with the opposite of God, right? Like I'm going to cross over that line. Like, I mean, maybe then, but otherwise, the Bible tells us that nothing can separate us from the love of God. So that is the good news. That is the gospel message that Jesus came, he lived, he died for you and for me in our place because we earned death through our sin, and he took that punishment for us. And because of that, we are innocent in the eyes of God. And we've been redeemed, which means God bought us with a hefty price, his one and only son. So let's go ahead and wrap it up there. God bless you guys. I pray God's blessing, as always, of strength upon you this week, that he will strengthen you. Holy and righteous Father in heaven, strengthen my viewers, those that are watching today. Strengthen our families. Continue to, Lord, to chase after the unbelievers and to reveal your truth and your glory unto them so they might believe and be saved. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. All right. God bless you guys, and thank you so much for watching.